The Predator Next Door, The Disturbing Crimes of Gavin Ramsey. The Douglas house on Page Street was more than a structure, it was a testament to a life well lived. Margaret Douglas, a 98-year-old widow, had called it home for over half a century. The garden, once brimming with colorful blooms, now reflected her modest energy and old age, a serene patch of greenery that seemed untouched by time. Margaret was a woman of remarkable strength, both in character and spirit. Even at her age, she maintained her independence, tending to her daily routines with a resilience that defied her years. But on a cold April night, this sanctuary would become the stage for an unimaginable crime. The night of intrusion. 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey lived just a few doors down. From the outside, he seemed like any other teenager, restless, impulsive, and often misunderstood. But inside, Gavin harbored dark thoughts, fueled by a growing obsession with adrenaline. He wasn't content with the fleeting thrills of teenage rebellion. He craved danger, chaos, and control. That night, he roamed the quiet streets of Wadsworth, Ohio, under the cover of darkness. His usual mischief involved rummaging through unlocked cars, taking trinkets that held no real value, all for the rush of not getting caught. But as he wandered past the Douglas house, something shifted. The faint glow of a lamp through the window revealed Margaret asleep on her living room couch. The sight stirred something in Gavin, curiosity mixed with a darker urge he could neither explain nor resist. The back door, unlocked as it often was in this safe, suburban neighborhood, offered no resistance. Gavin stepped inside, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The air was still, save for the soft sound of Margaret's breathing. He stood there for a moment, observing her frail form under the dim light, his mind racing with thoughts he didn't fully understand. As he inched closer, his phone trembled in his hand. He began recording, capturing the eerie stillness of the scene. It wasn't enough to simply be there. He wanted to keep this moment, to relive it later, to dissect the emotions coursing through him. But in his nervous excitement, Gavin bumped into a chair, the sound jolting Margaret awake. Her eyes opened wide with alarm, and she let out a startled cry, fumbling for her phone on the table beside her. Panic and control. Gavin froze, his mind blank except for one overwhelming thought. She knows who I am. Margaret, though frail, had seen him before. A boy from the neighborhood. A boy whose face she could easily identify. Instinct overpowered reason. Gavin lunged forward, his hands finding her neck in a desperate attempt to silence her. Margaret struggled, her weak arms flailing against his grip, but Gavin was stronger, younger. He pressed harder, shutting out her gasps and muffled cries until the room fell silent once more. For a moment, there was only the sound of Gavin's ragged breathing. He stared at Margaret's still form, the enormity of what he had done slowly sinking in. But instead of panic or regret, Gavin felt something else, an odd calmness, almost relief. The chaos had subsided, and in its place was a strange sense of control. The darkness within. Gavin didn't leave. He couldn't. His adrenaline-fueled mind was still reeling, searching for more. As he looked at Margaret's lifeless body, a new thought emerged, one that revealed the true depths of his disturbed psyche. What followed was a series of acts so vile that they defied understanding. Gavin's twisted mind turned Margaret into an object of his dark curiosity. He posed her, taking pictures and videos as if documenting his macabre triumph. The sense of power of having complete dominance over another being fed something inside him that had long been starved. In one video he used a jar of blackberry jam he found in her kitchen, smearing it on her hand and mocking the innocence of everyday life. For Gavin, it wasn't just about the act, it was about the grotesque symbolism, the defilement of what was pure and good. The calm after the storm. Hours passed. Gavin finally decided it was time to leave. He cleaned up haphazardly, shoving Margaret's body into a small closet, her delicate frame crumbling against the tight space. It was a grotesque mockery of the dignity she had carried throughout her life. Before slipping out into the night, Gavin took Margaret's red wallet, a trophy, a tangible reminder of his conquest. As he walked home, he felt a strange mix of elation and emptiness, his thoughts already turning to what he would do next. Back in his room, Gavin hid the wallet and reviewed the photos and videos he had taken, replaying the events of the night in his mind. To him, they weren't memories of a crime, they were achievements, evidence of his ability to outwit the world. The morning discovery. The next day, Margaret's family grew concerned when she didn't answer the phone. Her nephew, Howard, decided to check on her. As he entered the house, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The living room was disheveled, and Margaret's favorite coat was draped over a chair instead of hanging neatly by the door. Howard's search led him to the closet where he found her body. At first, he thought it was a pile of clothes until he noticed her shoes, her favorite pair, still on her feet. The realization hit him like a blow. Margaret wasn't just gone, she had been violated in the most heinous way imaginable. The investigation begins. The discovery of Margaret's body sent shockwaves through the quiet neighborhood of Wadsworth. The police were called immediately, and the scene was quickly cordoned off. Officers moved methodically through the home, their faces grim as they documented the chaos left behind. Margaret's closet, where her body was found, was a haunting sight. Her frail frame, contorted and bruised, bore silent witness to the unspeakable violence that had unfolded. Amidst the clutter, investigators found a jar of blackberry jam. It seemed innocuous at first, just another item out of place, until forensic tests revealed the unthinkable evidence of its use in acts that defied comprehension. The jar became a key piece of evidence, its presence raising even darker questions about the mind behind the crime. As word of Margaret's death spread, neighbors gathered in hushed groups, their conversations tinged with fear and disbelief. Margaret was the embodiment of kindness, a gentle soul who had spent her life helping others. To think someone could do this to her was unfathomable. But the horror was only beginning. A disturbing pattern. The Wadsworth Police Department quickly ramped up its efforts, calling in every available resource to solve the case. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, going door to door in search of leads. Most neighbors were eager to help, recounting anything unusual they might have seen or heard. Yet, for all their efforts, the picture remained frustratingly incomplete. One neighbor mentioned seeing Spectrum trucks in the area, though they admitted it might be nothing. Another noted that Margaret's porch light, typically left on, had been off for several days. Small details, seemingly unconnected, painted a murky picture. It wasn't until the police reviewed Margaret's neighborhood that a troubling detail emerged. A pattern of recent car break-ins had plagued the area. The crimes were minor loose change stolen, glove compartments rifled through, but they hinted at a prowler, someone with a penchant for trespassing. The connection was tenuous at best, but it was enough to prompt a deeper investigation into these petty crimes. One name kept surfacing: Gavin Ramsey. Gavin's past. To the untrained eye, Gavin appeared to be a troubled teenager, nothing more. His frequent run-ins with the law, felony at 16, several misdemeanors painted a picture of a boy struggling to find his way. But those who knew Gavin spoke of a darker side, a boy who didn't just act out but seemed to relish the chaos he created. Teachers described him as a bright student who had become increasingly withdrawn. Friends recounted bizarre conversations where Gavin would talk about wanting to hurt people or fantasize about the thrill of breaking into someone's home. There were stories of him chasing his siblings with knives, his laughter echoing as they screamed in terror. These weren't the actions of a typical teenager, they were red flags, warning signs that had gone unnoticed or unaddressed. Despite his troubled behavior, Gavin had mastered the art of deception. To outsiders, he could be charming, even likable. But those closest to him saw the cracks in his facade, the moments when his mask slipped, revealing a mind preoccupied with violence and control. The interrogation. The breakthrough came when a man in his 50s reported a carjacking in a nearby parking lot. At first, the man claimed it was a random attack, but under police questioning, his story unraveled. He admitted to meeting the carjacker through an app and revealed a detail that made officers' blood run cold. The perpetrator had admitted to being only 17 years old. This led police straight to Gavin Ramsey. When officers brought Gavin in for questioning, he seemed more annoyed than worried. Seated between his mother and a female detective, he fidgeted with a tissue, avoiding eye contact. His mother, visibly distraught, urged him to cooperate. "Whatever you've done, Gavin, it's better to come clean now," she said, her voice trembling. What happens in the dark comes to light. At first, Gavin admitted to the carjacking, spinning a story that painted him as a vigilante. He claimed he had posed as a 17-year-old on an app to lure predators, teaching them a lesson by stealing their cars. "It's not right," he said, feigning indignation. "A 50-year-old man meeting a kid. I wasn't going to let that slide." But the detectives weren't convinced. They pressed him, their questions sharp and relentless. Bit by bit, Gavin's bravado crumbled. A web of evidence. Forensic experts analyzed Gavin's phone, uncovering a digital trail that linked him to Margaret's murder. His search history was damning. Margaret Douglas, Wadsworth police reports, 98-year-old woman body found. Even more chilling were the locked files on his phone, a folder ominously titled Dark. Inside, they found videos and photos that removed any doubt about Gavin's guilt. One video showed Margaret asleep on her couch, filmed from inside her house. Another, taken later that night, captured unspeakable acts committed after her death. The evidence painted a picture of a calculated crime, one carried out not in a moment of panic but with cold deliberation. Confronted with the evidence, Gavin broke down. His demeanor shifted from smug to desperate, his words tumbling out in a mix of half-truths and excuses. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he stammered. She woke up and I panicked." The detectives weren't buying it. They knew this wasn't a crime of passion, it was the work of a mind twisted by a desire for control, a craving for the rush that came with crossing boundaries. The truth unravels. As the interrogation continued, Gavin's story changed again and again. He admitted to entering Margaret's house for the thrill, claiming he hadn't intended to hurt her. But as they delved deeper, the mask slipped, revealing the darkness within. "I guess I just wanted to feel alive," he said at one point, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's the adrenaline, you know. It makes everything else disappear." When asked why he stayed for hours after Margaret's death, Gavin grew defensive, refusing to elaborate. But the evidence spoke for itself. His actions weren't driven by fear or desperation, they were deliberate, calculated, and horrifyingly detached. A community in shock. As news of Gavin's arrest spread, the community of Wadsworth was thrown into turmoil. The idea that a boy from their own neighborhood, someone they had seen grow up, could commit such an atrocity was incomprehensible. Parents clutched their children a little tighter, their sense of security shattered. Margaret's family, too, struggled to process their grief. For Howard, the nephew who had found her body, the trauma was compounded by the knowledge of what she had endured. "She didn't deserve this," he said through tears. "She was strong, kind, and full of life. To think someone could do this to her." The case takes shape. With Gavin in custody and the evidence mounting, prosecutors began preparing their case. But the true extent of Gavin's depravity was only beginning to emerge. The twisted logic he used to justify his actions, the disturbing trophies he kept, and the dark fantasies he had nurtured all painted a chilling picture of a predator in the making. Unveiling the mind of a killer, Gavin Ramsey's arrest opened a Pandora's box of dark revelations, each more chilling than the last. As investigators pored over his journals, phone records, and interviews with those who knew him, a profile emerged, a disturbing mosaic of a young man on the brink of something even more sinister. In Gavin's journal, a startling entry stood out. "I want to know what it feels like to kill. Not out of anger, but just to see what it's like to take a life." This wasn't a fleeting thought. It was the musings of a mind spiraling deeper into fantasies of control, violence, and ultimate domination. The entries alternated between moments of self-awareness and cold rationalization. He described his emotions, or a lack thereof, with a detachment that unnerved even seasoned investigators. "I don't feel guilt. I don't feel sadness. I only feel alive when I'm doing something I shouldn't. Breaking rules gives me purpose. But perhaps most alarming were his attempts to justify his actions. Gavin saw himself as a predator among prey, destined to push boundaries others feared to cross. His entries about Margaret, while sparse, revealed a terrifying lack of humanity. To him, she wasn't a person but an opportunity, a thrill waiting to be seized. The trophy folder. The dark folder on Gavin's phone revealed not just evidence but a window into his warped psyche. Each image and video told a story of escalating depravity. One video showed Gavin peering over the edge of Margaret's couch as she slept, her frail form oblivious to the danger lurking just feet away. In another, Margaret was posed in ways that spoke to Gavin's need for control even after her death. The folder also contained recordings of Gavin narrating his actions, his tone devoid of remorse. Perhaps most disturbing was the inclusion of seemingly mundane photos, the jar of blackberry jam, gloves carefully laid out, and close-ups of Margaret's belongings. These trophies weren't random, they were artifacts of a night that Gavin seemed to relive and savor. A history of red flags. Interviews with Gavin's peers painted a portrait of a teenager teetering on the edge. Friends recalled chilling comments Gavin made in passing. He once told a classmate, "I could kill someone and not feel a thing." Another remembered him laughing while describing violent videos he had watched online, claiming they didn't disturb him because he was wired differently. His ex-girlfriend, Maddie, provided further insight. She recounted nights spent checking Gavin's location on Snapchat, only to find him wandering aimlessly through neighborhoods at 3 a.m. She described how he would become eerily calm during arguments, his voice dropping to a whisper as he said things like, "You don't know what I'm capable of." Yet Gavin's charm often masked his darkness. Teachers described him as polite, if withdrawn. Neighbors said he was the kind of boy who would shovel their driveway in the winter. But those closest to him knew better. Beneath the surface was a young man driven by impulses he barely understood and didn't seem to want to. The confession. During his second interrogation, Gavin's composure began to crack. The detectives, armed with the evidence from his phone, pressed him on his motives and actions. "Why did you go into Margaret's house that night?" one detective asked. "I didn't plan it," Gavin replied, his voice flat. "I was walking around, looking for unlocked cars. I saw her light on, and, I don't know. I just wanted to see if I could get inside. And once you were inside, she woke up," Gavin said, his eyes darting to the floor. "She saw me, and I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt her, but she wouldn't stop screaming." The detective leaned in. "You didn't leave after she stopped screaming, though. You stayed?" Gavin's jaw tightened. "I don't know why. I just did." "You don't know why you posed her body, took pictures, made those videos?" "I wasn't thinking," Gavin muttered, his voice rising. "It wasn't like that. I just wanted to feel something." "Did you feel something?" "No," Gavin whispered. "Not really. The adrenaline fixation." Gavin's repeated mentions of adrenaline became a focal point of the investigation. He described his need for it like an addiction, comparing the rush of breaking into cars or homes to a drug. "When I'm doing it, it's like nothing else matters. It's quiet in my head. I'm not scared or angry, I'm just there." This fixation on adrenaline helped investigators understand his actions that night. Margaret's unlocked door wasn't just an opportunity, it was a challenge. The risk of being caught, the thrill of crossing a boundary, that was the high Gavin craved. But the detectives knew there was more to it. Gavin's actions after Margaret's death weren't driven by adrenaline alone. They spoke to a deeper, darker-needed desire for control, for power, for dominance over another human being. A community's nightmare. As details of the case became public, the community of Wadsworth was paralyzed by fear and grief. Margaret had been a pillar of the neighborhood, a woman whose warmth and kindness had touched countless lives. To think her final moments were spent in terror was unbearable. Parents worried about their children, questioning how a boy like Gavin could grow up among them without anyone noticing the warning signs. Teachers wondered if they had missed opportunities to intervene, and neighbors, once trusting and open, now locked their doors and eyed strangers with suspicion. For Margaret's family, the pain was immeasurable. Her niece, Cindy, described the woman she had grown up admiring. She was strong, independent, and full of life. She deserved to live out her days in peace, not this. The prosecution prepares. Prosecutors faced a daunting task. While the evidence against Gavin was overwhelming, his age and claims of mental instability complicated the case. His defense team argued that Gavin was a troubled teenager, not a cold-blooded killer, and that his actions were the result of untreated mental illness. But the prosecution had a different narrative. They painted Gavin as a predator in the making, a boy whose fantasies of violence had escalated into a horrifying reality. They pointed to his journals, his phone records, and his own words during the interrogation as proof that this was no impulsive act but a deliberate descent into darkness. The calm before the trial. As Gavin awaited trial, the town braced itself for the legal battle ahead. Forensic psychologists analyzed his behavior, trying to determine whether he could be rehabilitated or if he was, as some feared, irreparably damaged. In the meantime, Margaret's family clung to each other, their grief mingled with anger and the desperate need for justice. Cindy put it best. "We can't bring her back, but we can make sure her killer never does this to anyone else." A town united, a family's grief. The trial of Gavin Ramsey was more than just a legal proceeding, it was a reckoning for Wadsworth, Ohio. The courtroom overflowed with spectators, journalists, and members of Margaret Douglas's family, all seeking answers to a question that had haunted them. Why? Why would a 17-year-old boy commit such an unimaginable act? Margaret's niece, Cindy, sat in the front row, clutching a photograph of her aunt. Beside her was Howard, Margaret's nephew, who had discovered her body. Their grief was palpable, their faces etched with the weight of what they had lost. As the proceedings began, they steeled themselves for the emotional onslaught that would follow. The prosecution's opening statement. The prosecution wasted no time in framing Gavin as a calculating and remorseless predator. Lead prosecutor Ellen Shaw began her opening statement with a stark declaration. Margaret Douglas survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless challenges in her 98 years of life. But her story was cruelly cut short by a teenager who treated her not as a person but as an object, a means to satisfy his dark desires. Shaw outlined the evidence, from Gavin's disturbing journal entries to the videos and photos recovered from his phone. She described how Gavin had broken into Margaret's home not out of desperation but for the thrill of it, and how his actions after her death revealed a mind driven by control and depravity. This was not an accident, she concluded. This was a deliberate act of violence by a young man who knew exactly what he was doing. The defense's argument. Gavin's defense team, led by attorney Robert Hayes, took a different approach. They painted a picture of a troubled boy who had been failed by the adults around him. Hayes argued that Gavin's actions were the result of untreated mental health issues and a toxic upbringing, not a reflection of his true character. Gavin Ramsey is not a monster, Hayes began. He is a child who lost his way, a child who needs help, not condemnation. The defense focused heavily on Gavin's struggles with depression and his alleged addiction to adrenaline. They argue that his actions were impulsive, driven by a need to escape his emotional turmoil rather than a desire to harm. To bolster their case, they called on Dr. Amanda Foster, a forensic psychologist, who testified about Gavin's mental state. Gavin exhibits traits consistent with conduct disorder and severe emotional dysregulation, she explained. His behavior, while reprehensible, is indicative of a young person grappling with profound psychological issues. The evidence unveiled. As the trial progressed, the prosecution presented its case in painstaking detail, laying bare the horrors of Gavin's actions. Crime scene photos were shown to the jury, eliciting audible gasps from the audience. The BlackBerry jam jar, the gloves, the locked phone folder, all were displayed as damning pieces of evidence. Detective Rachel Myers, who had interrogated Gavin, recounted his chilling confession. He showed no remorse, she testified. When asked why he stayed in Margaret's house after killing her, he said, "I didn't feel like leaving." The most harrowing moment came when the prosecution played a portion of one of Gavin's videos. The court watched in stunned silence as the grainy footage showed him creeping through Margaret's home, his breathing steady, his movements deliberate. For Margaret's family, it was almost too much to bear. Gavin takes the stand. In a surprising move, the defense decided to put Gavin on the stand. Dressed in a suit that seemed too big for his wiry frame, Gavin looked more like a nervous teenager than a cold-blooded killer. But his testimony would do little to sway public opinion. "Why did you go into Margaret Douglas's house that night?" Hayes asked. Gavin hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I wasn't thinking. I just ... I wanted to feel something. And when she woke up, I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt her." Under cross-examination, however, Gavin's facade began to crumble. Prosecutor Sharp pressed him on his actions after Margaret's death, pointing out the deliberate nature of his behavior. "You didn't leave. You stayed. You took photos and videos. Why?" Gavin stared at the floor. "I don't know. Did you feel bad about what you were doing?" "Not at the time." Sharp's final question cut through the courtroom like a knife. "Mr. Ramsey, do you feel bad now? Or are you just sorry you got caught?" Gavin had no answer. The family's impact statements. Before sentencing, Margaret's family had the opportunity to address the court. Cindy's voice trembled as she described her aunt's life and the void left by her death. Margaret was more than a victim. She was a person, a sister, an aunt, a friend. She was kind and strong and full of life. And now she's gone because of a senseless, selfish act. Howard, who had found Margaret's body, struggled to hold back tears. "I can't unsee what I saw that day," he said. "I can't forget the way she was taken from us. But I hope this court ensures that no one else ever has to suffer because of Gavin Ramsey." The verdict. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 3 hours before reaching a verdict. Gavin Ramsey was found guilty on all charges, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, stating, "This court believes you are beyond rehabilitation. Your actions were not just a crime against Margaret Douglas but a crime against humanity." As the gavel fell, Margaret's family embraced, tears streaming down their faces. Justice had been served, but the scars of that night would remain forever. Reflections. For Wadsworth, the trial marked the end of a nightmare but not the end of its impact. Parents held their children closer. Neighbors locked their doors. And Margaret's memory became a symbol of resilience in the face of tragedy. As for Gavin, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, a stark reminder of how far a person can fall when darkness goes unchecked. A community shattered, a family forever changed. In the months following the trial, Wadsworth struggled to reconcile its image as a quiet Midwestern town with the horror that had unfolded within its borders. Margaret Douglas's murder was not just a crime, it was a betrayal of the safety and trust the community had long taken for granted. Neighbors who once left their doors unlocked now installed security systems. Parents held hushed conversations with their children about the dangers lurking closer than they had ever imagined. For Margaret's family, the grief was compounded by the knowledge of what she had endured. Her niece Cindy spoke at a community vigil held in Margaret's honor. "My aunt lived her life with dignity, and it's up to us to ensure her memory isn't defined by what was done to her but by how she lived. She loved fiercely, worked tirelessly, and gave endlessly. That's the Margaret we choose to remember." The vigil drew hundreds, with candles illuminating a sea of faces as they mourned together. Margaret's house, the scene of unspeakable acts, became a focal point for healing. Flowers, notes, and candles lined the front porch, turning a place of horror into a space of remembrance. The prisoner and his past. Inside the Ohio State Penitentiary, Gavin Ramsey began serving his life sentence. At just 18 years old, he was one of the youngest inmates in the facility, yet his notoriety earned him neither respect nor sympathy. The details of his crimes spread quickly among the prison population, making him a target of both scorn and violence. Prison psychologists were assigned to assess Gavin's mental state, and their findings painted a chilling picture. Dr. Amanda Hughes, one of the lead evaluators, noted in her report, Gavin displays an inability to form genuine emotional connections and exhibits a profound detachment from the consequences of his actions. While he acknowledges his crime, his reflections lack depth, often revolving around how it affects him rather than his victim. During one of their sessions, Gavin attempted to explain his fascination with adrenaline, describing it as a way to escape the emptiness he felt. "It's like nothing else matters," he said. "In that moment, you're alive. Everything else just fades away." When pressed about his feelings toward Margaret, Gavin's responses were evasive. "I know what I did was wrong," he admitted, "but I can't change it now. Thinking about it won't help." The journals and letters. In prison, Gavin began keeping a journal as he had before his arrest. This time, however, the entries were more reflective, or at least appeared to be. "I don't know what's wrong with me." One entry read, "I keep trying to figure out how I got here, but the more I think about it, the less it makes sense. I never wanted to hurt anyone. It just happened." Yet, interspersed with these reflections were glimpses of the same disturbing thoughts that had defined him before his incarceration. In one entry, he wrote about the thrill of evading the police after his first carjacking, describing it as better than anything I've ever felt. Gavin also began writing letters to his family, particularly his mother. In them, he often oscillated between expressions of remorse and self-pity. "I'm sorry for what I've put you through," he wrote in one letter, "but I feel like I've been abandoned. Everyone hates me. I don't know how to deal with that." Cindy, Margaret's niece, described the letters as manipulative. "He's not sorry for what he did," she said in an interview. "He's sorry he got caught." There's a difference. The debate over rehabilitation. As Gavin's case gained national attention, it became part of a broader debate about juvenile offenders and rehabilitation. Advocates for criminal justice reform argued that Gavin's age and mental state should be considered in evaluating his potential for change. Critics, however, pointed to the calculated and heinous nature of his crime as evidence that he was beyond redemption. The passage of Ohio's Senate Bill 256, which abolished life sentences without parole for juvenile offenders, meant that Gavin would be eligible for parole at age 42. For Margaret's family, the prospect of his release was a source of ongoing anguish. "It's not just about Margaret," Cindy said. "It's about everyone he could hurt if he's ever let out. He didn't just make a mistake. He made a series of choices that led to my aunt's death. And I don't believe for a second that he wouldn't do it again." Margaret's legacy. In the wake of her death, Margaret's family established a foundation in her honor to support programs for senior safety and advocacy. The Margaret Douglas Foundation partnered with local organizations to provide resources for elderly residents, including home security upgrades and community outreach programs. "We can't change what happened to Margaret," Cindy said at the Foundation's launch event. "But we can make sure that her story inspires change and protects others." The Foundation became a beacon of hope in Wadsworth, turning tragedy into action. Its annual fundraiser, the Douglas Walk, brought the community together to honor Margaret's memory and support its mission. The final reflection. For Gavin Ramsey, life in prison would be marked by the weight of his actions, a weight he seemed unwilling or unable to fully comprehend. For Margaret Douglas's family and the Wadsworth community, the pain of her loss would never fully fade, but they found solace in their shared commitment to ensuring her legacy endured. Margaret's story was a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. But it was also a testament to the strength of a community united by compassion, resilience, and the enduring belief that even in the face of evil, good can prevail. The hearing. The day of Gavin's first parole hearing was a tense one. Reporters gathered outside the Ohio Correctional Facility where the proceedings were held while Margaret's family prepared their statements. Inside the hearing room, Gavin sat across from the parole board, his demeanor calm and measured. When asked why he believed he should be granted parole, Gavin responded, "I've spent the past 25 years trying to understand the harm I caused and the pain I inflicted. I can never undo what I did, but I've worked to better myself and help others. I want to be part of the solution, not the problem." Margaret's family presented their case with equal fervor. "This isn't about second chances," Cindy said. "It's about protecting society from someone who has already proven what they're capable of." Gavin Ramsey didn't just kill Margaret, he desecrated her. That kind of evil doesn't go away. The verdict. The parole board deliberated for hours before reaching their decision. Gavin Ramsey's request for parole was denied, with the board citing concerns about his lack of genuine remorse and the risk he posed to the community. He would not be eligible for another hearing for 5 years. Margaret's family wept as the decision was announced, a small measure of relief washing over them. "It's not justice," Cindy said later, "but it's a reprieve, a legacy of vigilance." Even as the hearing ended, the fight was far from over. Margaret's family knew they would face this battle again and again, each time reliving the horrors of her murder, but they were resolute in their mission. "We'll be there every time," Cindy said. "As long as it takes, we'll make sure Gavin Ramsey never hurts anyone else." Margaret deserves that. The world deserves that. For Gavin, the parole denial was a setback but not the end. In his cell, he returned to his notebooks, his letters, and his carefully curated image of reform. Whether he truly believed in redemption or simply sought freedom, only time would tell. The unfinished story. Margaret's death left scars that would never fully heal, but her memory became a rallying cry for justice and compassion. In Wadsworth, her story remained a stark reminder of the fragility of safety and the resilience of those left behind. As the parole board's decision rippled through the community, one question lingered: could someone like Gavin ever truly change? For now, the answer remained locked behind the bars of his prison cell, alongside the secrets only he could fully understand. At Truth in the Shadows, we are committed to sharing stories like Margaret's to spark important conversations and drive meaningful change. If this story moved you, we encourage you to join our community. Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of real-life cases that highlight both the fragility and strength of the human spirit. Your engagement helps us not only to tell these stories but also to support causes that make a tangible impact. Together we can ensure that voices like Margaret's are never forgotten and that her legacy continues to inspire hope and action. Thank you for being part of this journey. Remember to stay vigilant, be kind, and always seek the truth even in the shadows.